Thank you, Vice Chancellor and Dean, for the kind introduction. It is always a pleasure to come to JGU. This is a very special occasion for me because this is the first time that I'm meeting the first batch of students in public policy. My first experience with teaching public policy students was in 1991. So I'm quite happy that today we will have a chance to interact on a topic which is of increasing, which is becoming increasingly prominent around the world. In public policies, every few years, some buzzwords come in, like the new public management or privatization or the public-private partnerships. And what we find is that when the buzzwords come in, there is always some substance behind it, but there is also a great deal of elasticity to the terms that are used. And unless these methods or concepts are used in a very nuanced and a mature way, we may find that just following the fashion, as in other cases, does not lead to desired outcome. So what I would like to do this afternoon is to give you some broad introduction or exposure to what is meant by PPP, why is the PPP done, and what have been some of the international experiences, what are the lessons that we can learn, and then apply it to India. I would very much welcome your questions and comments, but unless you have a clarificatory questions, I would appreciate if you could wait for your raising your questions till the end of the presentations. I have a lot of slides which I cannot show all of them given the time constraint, and I would request as usual that these slides be made available to all the students and to all the stakeholders. These are, as they say, knowledge is the only factor of production which does not have diminishing returns. So I'm quite happy to have these circulated around. Now, let's first look at, in very broad terms, what has been the change in the way public financial management, public delivery of services, the way the public policies are conceptualized, designed, implemented, evaluated. What has been the change over the past at least 60 to 70 years? Now, if we go to about 1950, then at that time, where does this show? Oh, it doesn't show up very well. But if we go to the top part of this particular slide, what we found was that this was the 1950s and earlier, when there was a public sector, there was a private sector, and if we take national or domestic and international as the fourfold classification, almost all the government activities were confined to domestic public sector. There was not much interaction between the public and the private sectors. One reason for this was that the size of government sector was fairly small. It's not recognized now, but at the time of Great Depression, if we look at the government expenditure and tax revenues to GDP ratio in the United States, it was less than 10%. Yeah? And even by the end of World War II, it had not risen much above 15-17%. So government was small relatively. Welfare state had not really expanded at that time. But what happened soon after the two world wars, Great Depression, and its aftermath, when the government got a breathing space and became more confident about their role in the economy and their planning capacities in the 1950s, the state began to slowly expand. So the Beveridge Plan, other welfare states, measures, and so on came about. And so we got a lot more interaction in the domestic sphere between the public and the private, which is exemplified by President Eisenhower's in US of the 1960 speech when he was leaving and President Kennedy was being inaugurated, about the warning against the military-industrial complex. So even today, what Eisenhower said is true. The largest defense contractor in the United States is Boeing, which is we think of it as a commercial airliner, but actually it's the largest defense contractor in the United States. So there were a lot of these interactions that began to take place. But even in the 50s and 60s, the international trade flows, capital flows, financial flows were relatively small, and they occurred between mainly high-income countries, not on a global scale. But that all began to change, and today's public policy people, civil servants, other stakeholders, they face an extremely complex challenge because we have now not only the much heightened interaction between the public and the private sectors in the domestic arena, but we also have domestic and international arena where if the government officials are not networking and are not understanding the external dimension, they cannot simply do their jobs. Moreover, the government to GDP expenditure tax to GDP ratios are now substantially higher. So in India, for example, if we take government expenditure at all levels of government, it is about 28% of GDP. Our tax revenue is around 18% of GDP. The rest of it is from non-tax sources, including domestic borrowing, debt creation. Let me give you some idea of the dimensions that we are talking about in terms of these interactions. Let's take the Gates Foundation, Microsoft founder. Now the Gates Foundation has assets worth about 60 billion US dollars, plus minus few billion, depending on the Wall Street behavior that day. And according to the American laws, they have to spend 5% of their assets as charity in order to qualify for tax exemption. Otherwise, they have to pay tax. So 5% of 60 billion is $3 billion. The Gates Foundation concentrates most of that expenditure on health. So $3 billion is larger than the whole budget of the World Health Organization. So you have one foundation, I'm not talking about Clinton Foundation, other foundation. Now if you are a health policy official, or if you are in health policy in NGO or anywhere, in any organization, even private organization, how can you not be aware of what the priorities of Clinton, Gates, others foundations are in the healthcare policy, and try to see that their priorities are such that your country can leverage on in order to improve the healthcare status of your citizen. Now, if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. That was not the civil service job of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So today, we face a much more complex environment, much more, and this is why it is called the new public finance. And I've given you, it can be downloaded, thanks to the UN initiatives. All their publications can be available free as a knowledge, no diminishing returns, public goods, and so on. And it can be downloaded. So you can look at more details in there, but I think this graph is very useful. This is taken directly from the book. It's very useful, which captures this history. So we have to have some idea. And now you can see where public-private partnerships are coming in, because the organizational structures, here is public, here is private, those two poles, they have now organizational structures are very different. Okay? And there are so many complex organizations that we have a continuum between public and private. And often they mix along in very not predictable, but in a way that you would not expect, unexpected ways. Okay, let me just, so now the networking skills involving domestic as well as international stakeholders is important. The international scrutiny on Millennium Development Goals, others, all those are increasing. And this was something that in the 50s, nobody had to worry about MDGs. Okay, and nobody was really looking at, there was no Transparency International, there were no domestic NGOs, there were not others. So now the government officials have much more complex set, and this is where, as future public policy scholars and practitioners, you have a great deal of responsibility. So it is exciting as well as challenging. Okay? And so you will not lack for either excitement or challenge in your future career as you graduate and go on to your professional work. So we see in India as well that we are doing a lot of things where there is a private, state-linked, not-for-profit. We now have Section 25 company, which is not-for-profit company. We are creating newer and newer forms of organizations in order to deliver public services. But that requires coordination. And that coordination cost, and coordination has not always been a great strength of the bureaucracy. Because the bureaucracy is, particularly any bureaucracy, but the government bureaucracy, they think in ministry terms or in silo terms. And then suddenly to be faced with this environment requires a mindset change. And in public-private partnership, the experience suggests that this is particularly important. Because the government sector thinks of itself as a sovereign, and they can change what they like, and they are used to ruling or exercising power. But when you say partnership, so one of the light-hearted question or not so light-hearted question in PPP is being in a relationship between man and a woman or a marriage. Relationship is not permanent, not that many commitments. Marriage is a lot of commitment, and the partnership is like that. Partnership means that you bring something and it's going to be enduring. So this is why not everything is PPP. If government gives out a procurement contract to buy computer system, that's not partnership. That's just a contractual relationship which will end. If government tells Ernst & Young, give us this report, Ernst & Young prepares the report, you may be employed by them, you give that report to the government, you discuss with them, your relationship ends. It's not a partnership, it's a contract. And it's a contractual relationship, so it's like that relationship rather than a marriage. It's not a marriage. And so PPP is a marriage, and the partnership requires very different mindset. And the partners have to be bringing something of value. If you are not bringing something of value, how can a marriage work if each side doesn't bring something that other side values, and in the process also adjust and compromises and so on? Otherwise the marriages can't last. And similarly, a lot of PPPs have not lasted because the mindsets were not aligned. And this aligning of interest, where there is a inherent principal-agent problem, and the conflict relationship, is really at the heart of the PPP. And so this intangible aspect, unless one is ready for it, it becomes very difficult to try to get PPPs going. Now, another mindset change that is needed in the context of the PPP and the 20th century is that if we are going to have so many interactions and linkages and so on, then we cannot waste 21st century the way we wasted 20th century with lot of harm on ideologically arguing whether state is better than the market or public sector is more progressive than the private sector, and calling each other names, profit-minded, or the public sector are inefficient by definition, and so on. None of that is supported by the theory. We have got problems which are so complex, whether we take our municipal services, water supply, waste management, natural resource management, transportation, education, health, almost everything you can think of are so complex that unless we develop a mindset that says, let's complement each other, whether it is a state, market, and the not-for-profit sector, unless we complement each other and try to see where the roles can be played in a constructive way, rather than to create ideological debates on the basis of some 19th century or earlier guys, as Keynes used to point out, that if you are, many people who think themselves as practical men do not realize that they are echoing views of some defunct economist. Now, Keynes had he was an economist, he had all right to say as a great economist about this, but the idea is that we simply cannot afford this ideological kind of debate that is going on, because there is no way. Just like the question of what should government do is a silly question. It should never be asked. Because what should government do? Historically, government has been doing a lot of things, and it goes from one end to the other. Okay? And different agencies have held different views about the government or the authority and what they should do. So if you read Bible, or if you know of Bible, then there is a lot of conflict between Christ and the moneylenders. Right? I mean, where is the Christ and the moneylenders came in? Here is a religious person, and here is a grubby, the interest and the usury and so on. So the whole Middle Ages was spent arguing about what is a just price, which never can be defined. Okay, and so we have had all kinds of situations. We cannot say what should government do. Okay, now let's now look at what if a government wants to do infrastructure. Notice that when infrastructure is done, there are two sets of issues. One is the capital cost. You have to build infrastructure. So if you want to educate people, you have to build schools, and you have to equip them, right, like this. Now, when you build it, that's an infrastructure capital cost. But then there is also an operating cost. Who is going to run? So you can have, in many countries you will find, through often the aid money, nice bridges and nice roads get built. But there is no operation and maintenance budget. So within 5 years, the asset deteriorates. So now we got to, when we look at infrastructure, we have to look at both the capital cost and the running cost. Let's look at what are the options that any government is going to have. The first option that the government has is direct public provision and production. The difference between provision and production is that the provision means that the financing is coming out of the budget, or government is organizing the financing, whether it is through borrowing or through aid or others. So that is a provision. Production is whether government actually undertakes through its public works department a particular infrastructure project. So our Delhi metro project, for example, is both provision and production by the state, because the state set up a company and they built it. But if we go to the Delhi airport, it is the production has taken place in a different way, and the provision also is in a different way, where government is involved in part, but there is also a private sector. It is more of a joint venture, or you can now say PPP. PPP and joint venture are very similar. And in terms of the negotiations, that becomes very, 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 very clear. Now, when should government do it? And what I want to emphasize is that a lot of the projects are always going to be done through this route. Take our Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. There is no other way except by financing it through the budget and the government organizing the production if they can contract out. But notice that's not PPP. You are just contracting out. You say, build this road, I'll pay you, and you have a contract management and other skills that you need. So there is no way you can do PPP because there is no business model there. PPP requires a business model. Otherwise, you can't do PPP. So now what is the key factor here? Government production cost. For many infrastructure projects, this may be an option, provided government can produce efficiently and in time, has adequate finances and project management capabilities. And one of the things that I would very much urge you to have is, even if you have a short course, is on project management. And the project management skills, unfortunately, in many governments are lacking. One of the ways to look at it is the public works department and their level of functioning in different countries at different levels. And that if that can be improved, that can have a substantial positive impact, because a lot of the project, PPP or not PPP, PPP is just a method. It's not a panacea. It's just a method. And so we have to know when to use that method, when not to use it. You have to strengthen this. And given massive infrastructure needs, however, this is not going to be enough. And it is also useful in terms of economic theory that you have to have some alternative to measure yourself against. So if you have only one airline in the country or one insurance company, as India had before 1997, how do you know what the alternatives can do? So economists don't like monopoly because monopoly hides information of what alternatives can do. And this is where the contestability, competition, and the alternative ways of doing things are so very important. That's how you get resource efficiencies. So second is the contracting out, involving variation of design, build, finance, operate, and transfer. So you want to build an airport, you tell okay, you can design it with a it's called private party, but it's not always a private party. So if let's say the airport is being done with the another government agency, so Dubai Port is doing port project in India, then Dubai Port is a government company. Deutsche Post, the DHL, it's a government company. So when you do a PPP with DHL, it's government. It's not government private in that sense, in the literal sense of the term. So we have to be very nuanced, very understand where the organizational structures are coming from. So we have to have contracting out involving variations of this. And a lot of times what PPP is called is this contracting out. Now, there was a very good World Bank study, which I've cited in the back, in 2003, that actually read the contracts of the contracting out in Latin America, about 250 contracts. Each contract is 300 pages long, by the way. So a lot of people who talk about PPP, I am for it, I am against it, this, have never read the contract. Most of the contracts are secret in any case, and you have to have access to it. The World Bank guys had access to it. They published a report. Again, I've given you can download it, those who are interested. And they found that 60% of the contracts were renegotiated. That's not surprising. The PPP is going to last for 25, 30 years. Now, if you build a road, tollways, others, airports, you're not going to build it for 2 years or 5 years. That's not a good use of capital. It should last a long time. But no, we can't see long time. We can't write, in terms of the more advanced economic theory, we cannot write complete contracts. We don't have that capability. So the contracts are always going to be partial. And the expertise available on the government side, on the legal side, is not always commensurate with the expertise available on the private side. Whether in structuring the financial deals or in PPP or in many other projects. So now, if you are going to have this imbalance in this, the government side must understand that they are only going to get a good contract if they have knowledge themselves, which is equivalent to the knowledge on the other side. You cannot fight knowledge with ignorance. If you are ignorant and other side is knowledgeable, they will take you to the cleaners. So the PPP won't work if the government doesn't build its own capacity. And that includes building capacity of the public works department for managing public projects, and of the civil servants to do that. So those are essential skills of the future civil servant. The third is the PPP. So notice that I'm talking about three options that any government has for infrastructure. And they are not always easy to differentiate from contracting out. But what are some of the key aspects? First, transaction costs are likely to be high in any PPP because there is a conflicting goal of the parties. Private sector wants to make profit, even if it is Deutsche Post, they want to make profit. That's where they are, why they are set up that way. The government has certain other goals. So there's a goal conflict that is involved. The two parties have different mindset, as I had indicated. One of the things that that happens is that in a typical bureaucracy, private or public, the flow of information is vertical. But for a good PPP, the flow of information must be horizontal. It's a flat organization. And if you say, oh, I wait for my minister, or my guy is away, or this is happening, you can't do PPP. You got to have a clear accountability, clear principles, and clear decision-making authority, and otherwise time is money. What is the cost of 6-month delay on a toll road? Huge. Economic cost is huge. But how much is that understood as a cost? If it is not understood, you're not going to get PPP as being very, very successful. So transaction costs are high. Finance costs are high because private finance is more expensive than government finance. So if you look at any country, and if you look at sovereign government yield, would that be lower or higher than the private corporate bond yield? It will be lower. That means the government can borrow at a lower rate than the private finance. So if you do PPP because you don't have money and you are asking for money, that's exactly the wrong rationale to do PPP. Because you are already locking yourself in a high cost finance. You are locking yourself in a high transaction cost. So something else have to give to make up for those. What has that to give? The operational efficiencies. Now one of the sad part around the world when I go, and I'm going to Kazakhstan on Sunday, and I'm going to speak to their government government officials on PPP, they're having some problems with their PPP, is that if you are going to try to look at finance and say, we do it, the sad part is that often the government themselves say that we do go to private sector, not just only for finance when they are cornered, but also because private sector is more efficient than public sector. Now, anecdotally, many of you may think, oh yeah, that's a reasonable proposition. It turns out that a very rigorous economic analysis, empirical analysis, does not show that private firms are necessarily more efficient than public firms. It doesn't show that. Now, so that the idea is that efficiency doesn't just lie one way. There is no, if you give private monopoly, if there are no real bidders and you haven't negotiated the contract well and so on, it ends up costing you far more than it otherwise would, except that the political advantage is that the cost will be in the future when the guys currently negotiating are no longer in power and the new guys will have to bear the burden, but the future taxpayers are burdened. So all the more reason why the current and the future taxpayers must insist on the accountability and transparency of the PPP projects. How many of you have seen the Delhi airport or Bangalore airport or whatever other PPP, actual PPP contract signed and read it? Now, if you don't, you know in contractual design, I mean, we have eminent lawyer here, I mean, one comma, one thing can completely change the meaning of a contract. So if you are not reading the contract, how can you really evaluate it? And a lot of time when I'm asked about the sovereign wealth funds, and say, are they doing a good job? Or say, I don't know, because I don't know their accounts. And I don't trust what they are putting out. So unless I get some chance to see it, it's very difficult. So the PPP are only useful under certain conditions. And you have to strengthen the other part, the contract management, the other skills, public sector management. So what are the conceptual foundations for PPP? One is recent technological and other developments permit unbundling involving production and distribution. So before we had a vertically integrated, let's say, monopoly, where the government, the policymaker role, regulatory role, service provider role were all one. But now in electricity, for example, we can separate generation of electricity. You can have many players. Electricity can be generated even in a domestic small area with compost turning into energy and so on, to very large nuclear power plants. Then you have distribution, the transmission. Sorry, not distribution, transmission. Transmission lines, you don't want to have 10 lines going because that's very expensive. Just like you don't want 10 waste pickers come to your street, different companies, and pick up those waste. You want one guy to come because that's more economical. But how you select that guy and whether that guy has a monopoly or can be replaced, that is the issue. And that provides the incentive in the transmission. And then the distribution, you can have as many distribution players and others, but before everything was one. So we are still paying, if you looked at this morning's paper, it says that the central government, union government, by the way, the Constitution of India does not use the word central government. It uses the word union government, which means that we are a federal country. And a union must respect the states. So the union government is going to have 2 lakh crores of rupees set aside to bail out the power companies, the state electricity companies. And notice the fiscal risk that this has created. Now, if we just say, oh, they are not working and now let's do PPP and get into it, then we get into the kind of Enron situation that we did earlier, where it creates a lot more of problems. So the emergence of new public finance that I explained in this together provides potential for realizing economic efficiency through greater specialization and innovation in organizing infrastructure and public amenities. So the key is to organize not just the PPPs, but also other options for their provision to realize the potential. Now we need simultaneous accounting and management information reforms, shift from cash accounting to accrual accounting. You learn all that next term when you have public finance course. And the public procurement system. So Indian government has introduced a bill, cabinet has approved the bill called the Public Procurement Bill of 2012. And how do we do procurement is, and the transparency, the efficiency of it is extremely important, and accountability of it is extremely important. Otherwise you can't do PPP well either. Not only you can't do other function. So it is now recognized, and I've got a lot of things on procurement, but I realize that we are running out of time. So I'm just going to go to a couple of other slides and then take questions. What are the main elements of PPP? Shared authority. Now, government can't say, oh, we are sovereign. We agreed that highway will go like this, but our chief minister thinks differently, so now it will go like this. You just ruin the project. Yeah? So you have to have a shared authority. So you have a mature political system, mature public policy debates, not infantile ones. Responsibility, joint responsibility for outcome. Joint investment, both sides bring in something. It's not just one side. So anytime, as they say, if some deal is too good to be true, it is. So look at the gift horse in the mouth when somebody says that. So this happened. I was in Tanzania about a couple of months ago, and my Tanzanian host were telling me, look, this new airport is coming up, and Chinese are building this new airport, and they are giving us free. I said, well, that's great. You are going to get a new airport free, and then. Quietly they told me that yes, that's what they offered, but you see no work is going on. I said, why no work is going on? He said, well, they offered us free, we said yes, and then they came back and said, oh, we'll do it only if you give us that mining right in this part of your country. And we said, thank you very much, we are not going to give you that mining right, we don't want your airport, thank you, we'll build it ourselves. Okay? So a lot of the PPPs, when there is a knowledge gap, there is others, things are not done well, you can get into wrong choices. Joint investment, sharing liability risk taking, and mutual benefit. Profit is not a dirty word. First of all, profit in many public policies is used wrongly. In economic theory, you have to provide risk-adjusted normal rate of return for capital to be forthcoming in that activity. So normal rate of return means zero economic profit. So what the idea should be that you'd want the PPP to be such that a normal risk-adjusted economic profits profits are being made, but no economic profits over and above, which we'll call monopoly profits. You want to avoid that. So the excessive profits should not be, but to say profit should not be made, then how are you going to get a private sector? If you say, oh, this is like the debate, infantile debate that would say, oh, we will privatize loss-making enterprises but not profit-making enterprises, without even specifying whether profit is accounting profits or not, or economic profits. But why would anybody want to buy a loss-making enterprise unless there is a valuable real estate like in textile mills or others that is underlying that and they will make money out of that. And so then they can buy because the real value of asset is high. But otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. And to think that the profit is dirty word, private sector is dirty word, public sector is more progressive, all those mindset things, if you imbibe it, you better not engage in PPP because you can't succeed. These are all antithetical to a PPP. I won't go in, let me do the final things. You can look at the slides. Here is, by the way, one of the international experiences on the private finance initiative of UK in 1992. And they structured PPPs in that way. Again, it assumed that private firms are better at managing projects, public sector better at raising or obtaining financial and some real resources like land. But what they found that the 717 contracts suggests capital cost of 55 billion pounds, but the overall repayment of 301 billion until 2049-50. And the yearly payment will peak at about 10 billion in 2017 or whatever. So this is from the government treasury. And what they basically concluded is that the infrastructure projects in Britain invariably rank towards the top of the project cost. And under PFI in UK, the time taken to deliver a project is 3 years. In Canada, 1 year. In Australia, 16 months. And cost of carrying out procurement in UK is twice as much as France. To build a school under PFI, average time in UK 2 years. In Australia, Canada, 9 months. So the PFI in UK has not worked. If anybody from UK comes and says, we can show you how to do PPP, tell them, yes, please explain to us, but we also need to be a bit careful. Now, finally, the 5 questions that we have to ask under PPP. Why is PPP agreement being entered into for the concerned activity or project? Somebody says, oh, we need the schools and highways and sewage treatment, but we have no money, but we must have it now. That's exactly the wrong reason to enter into it, because that's not why you enter into PPP. You enter into PPP because over the project life, PPP will give you better value for money than the alternative ways of doing things. I gave you 3 options. A PPP can give you better value for money over the project life, right? 25 years or whatever, in both the operating cost and in the capital cost. Then you do it. So you have to show. Anytime any PPP, see the financial projections. And that's why the financial literacy and understanding of finance is very critical now in this particular age. Second, what would constitute success? How do we define it? In many cases, success is when you don't really need the private partner because you have enough capabilities yourself to do it. Best thing is to do it yourself. Okay? Gram Sadak Yojana, if you can build well and your public sector works department is good, this is the simplest way to do it. You can coordinate, you can get lower cost, you can do it, so build your capacities. That's the lesson. Is sharing of accountability responsibilities clearly specified? Are all parties in agreement on the nature of the PPP? So one of the PPP that failed in UK was a $16 billion metro rail project because the private party thought that they were entering into a contract whereby each item of work will be costed separately on a cost plus basis. Now a cost plus contract is very favorable to the producer and not to the government. Government thought they were entering into a fixed price contract. So now in a sophisticated government like UK, this is from UK Parliamentary Committee analysis, that's what they concluded, that's what UK officials were thinking. That it was a fixed cost, and the private were saying this was a cost plus. So we have to be in agreement on the nature. Will the total economic cost be less than or at least equal to what it would cost if undertaken by the government organization itself? So efficiency gain must be substantial to justify higher transaction cost and greater complexity. Thank you very much.